Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Alumni Day In. Even though we're here in this virtual space, we would still love to get to know you as much as possible. So if you could leave in the comments where you're viewing from, and if you're an alum, what year you graduated, we would love to see that from you. Wherever you're tuning in from, we're so glad that you're here. My name is Dakota Bogner, and I have the pleasure of working for the CSU Alumni Association, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. Many of our attendees today are CSU Alumni Association members. Membership does so much for our CSU community, including making events like this possible, and so much more. If you'd like to learn more about membership and explore all that the Alumni Association has to offer, please download our mobile app, which you can do here on the screen. The CSU Alumni Association has many virtual events coming up, as well as many past event recordings available to you. I will include links in the comments here shortly to subscribe to our YouTube channel and see our upcoming events calendar. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar and some additional resources in the next few days, so please be on the lookout for that. And then towards the end of the event today, I will be putting a survey link in the chat, so please take a moment to fill that out. We would really appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions for our presenter throughout the presentation today, please don't hesitate to leave those in the comments. I will monitor those closely, and we will leave time at the end for our presenter to answer those for you. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started with the fun today. I would love to introduce our presenter, Mac McGoldrick. He'll start by telling you a little bit more about himself.
Hi, everyone. First, I will thank the Alumni Association for the honor of joining you all today. And thank you, Dakota and the team, for all your hard work in arranging and setting everything up. Excuse me. So Dakota asked you to put where you're tuning in from. I'd also love to hear from alumni who took my class. So if you took classes with me, please put that in the chat. Today, so I'm Mac McGoldrick. I've been teaching in the philosophy department for 19 years. My kind of area of academic interest is Indian religion, primarily Hinduism, Buddhism, religious community, and translation work. So it's a delight that I was invited to come and speak with you today. The name of the talk is called Regenerative Approaches to Well-Being from the Interior Out. I have a tendency when I'm in the classroom to hop around to various ideas. And so what I did was write my talk out. And so I'm going to read it to you. And then we'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So listen and cultivate any questions that you might have as we go along. So as you saw, I assume when you signed up for this webinar that the talk description mentioned well-being, and we are going to touch on parts of that during this talk, but I expanded the scope a bit. Well-being must be considered in an expansive and wonderful complexity, and not limited to various compartments like health or happiness or creativity. So I'm going to talk about creating the circumstances for well-being in a regenerative paradigm. So how do we create real change in the world? I believe that we grew up with a limited understanding of what it takes for an individual to create real change in the world. There are three narratives that emerge across all levels of culture. So in addition to being a philosophy professor, I'm really a sociocultural anthropologist. So you might hear some anthropology slipping in. So there are three levels that emerge across all levels of culture. There's what's called the hero hypothesis. And that says to save the day, a person needs to be superior, endowed with extraordinary skills and resources, staunchly committed to carrying the banner, fighting the fight, and rousing the world out of its torpor so that it lives up to the ideals they hold for it. The second is that if we can't be a hero, we need to find and follow an heroic leader, a charismatic someone who inspires us to pursue an ideal. Many times that's abused, and we see it abused in politics and religious organizations all over the world. The third basic narrative is the do-gooder model. If we are as good as we can be, if we work long hours, recycle and compost, vote and donate, and especially if we're kind to dogs and children, then everything will be fine in the end. So I'm going to revisit all of those in a minute. But well-being, let's talk about well-being for a second. It's a positive outcome that is meaningful for people and for many other sectors of society, because it tells us that people perceive their lives, that their lives are going well. Good living conditions, strong, reliable relationships, resilience, capacity, quality of experience, safety and security, health and strength, mental health, healthy engagement and behaviors, productivity, belonging, all of these are elements of well-being. And I will tell you that that change, since we're talking about change, I'll tell you that there's no such thing as individual change. I wouldn't normally talk about Buddhism in the context of the kind of consulting work that I do outside of the classroom, because it easily scares people off. But you all knew that you were tuning into a religious scholar, so here we go. Buddhism teaches a concept which in Sanskrit is called praticca, and it's the inconceivable complexity of our interconnected world. It is inconceivable to think of everything that has happened over the course of our lives that gave rise to the circumstances that brought us here today, tuned in to this event together. The present moment emerges from that complexity, and our ability to fully engage in that present moment is reliant on our ability to understand what is really happening without judgment or preconception. And because of this, the hero model isn't a viable road forward. We don't really need more heroes. Heroes can easily become villainous and authorities, create systems to reassure their position, feed ego delusion, and further isolate and alienate other people. The main problem that I see is that people willingly devalue themselves and other people when we adopt this heroic model. There is an inherent problem with the idea of doing good. You might remember in grade school that nobody liked the do-gooder. Do-gooders operate from the assumption that some people or some actions are by definition more virtuous than others. They create an arbitrary general standard or idea of goodness that doesn't allow for something good to arise from specific people within a specific set of circumstances. Usually we see that do-gooder definitions of virtue are memes or mores based on cultural or subcultural agreements like political correctness or religious piety that are passed down from generation to generation and therefore remain relatively unexamined. They're usually very generic, and they rob us of our responsibility to discover and choose ways of thinking and acting that might truly transform specific situations we encounter in life. For these reasons, I believe we need a better theory of change, one that goes beyond the heroic and the do-good models, and that taps into, develops, and releases the inherent potential of every human being to live in ways that make meaningful contributions to the world. And that is decidedly non-heroic. So I want people to move, I want to help people, I should say, to move from doing things better to doing better things. I have told my classes for 20 years that each and every one of the students, as individuals, even in the complexity of this interconnection, are completely amazing and can make incredible dents in this universe. Students and anyone for that matter should work to discover their purpose, their unique reason for being, and then critically to act purposefully. So I've brought these ideas out of the classroom and into the corporate world, and have worked with small startup companies to multinational tech giants. And I've helped these successful organizations approach the concept of well-being from an organizational and individual perspective by the gentlest means, through dialogue, probing questions, systemic frameworks that encourage them to learn how to manage their own thinking processes. This process helped people involved gain profound insight into their work, both individually and collectively. And like I said, the methods are really non-heroic. I simply work to help people do their jobs and make life decisions better by educating their thinking. And I do the same thing, I hope, in classrooms with CSU students. Most people are attempting to do the best they can with the tasks in front of them. But by focusing on the ways that they thought about how to carry out these tasks, we're able to help transform company cultures and business outcomes. People can become change agents from within the roles they have chosen to play in their companies and in their communities. And this represents a certain sense of evolution. And evolution of society is a collective activity. It comes from waking up and developing all of the people to the systemic benefits that can flow from thinking better about how they play their chosen daily roles in society. We make a better world by teaching ordinary people practices for shifting their thinking processes and enabling them to show up as parents and employees, citizens, and neighbors in completely new ways. How? Through non-heroism. Non-heroism happens in everyday life with all of the imperfections and incompleteness that are simply part of being human. You don't need to sacrifice the things you love or give up the ordinary joys of having a job, a family, neighbors. What they do require is an ability to see how the work we are doing, and that's any work, personal or professional development, or any kind of learning, can play a critical role within society. Our effects can be direct through the influence we have on social institutions, or indirect by preparing others and ourselves to thrive in their roles. My work with students and clients is directly connected to the contributions we aim to make. But this requires us to think deeply about what we're doing, what we bring to it, and how we do it. We humans have to change the way that we live on this planet and become participants in living systems, relationships that are at least as important to the good life as material success and work. As an example, it's a place where we can contribute to a better world. So I propose that we learn to use frameworks to, one, enable us to better understand and work with complex phenomena, and two, allow us to manage the complexities of our own minds. So a framework breaks our mental models. It breaks our programming. A framework encourages consciousness, systematic thought, and careful consideration of what is appropriate in any given specific situation. They can only serve our purpose if we engage them in a conscious way. So how do we do that? Through the practice of mindfulness. So in the work that I've done with companies in Silicon Valley, I teach a curriculum that focuses on individual interior exploration through a set of trainings to bring that internal understanding into the world. So we have internal personal development that informs relationships in the external world. So the first thing that we always talk about is presence. And so presence is a naturally occurring state. It's your life story is in the foreground of consciousness, and presence is in the background. Okay, it's formless, it's boundless. It's not about thinking. Thinking can kind of quiet and subside when we're in a present state. We love to mentally label things. Some of you are already labeling the content of this talk, but we can create the circumstances where but can we create the circumstances where this present moment is enough? We can, through presence, observe and choose beyond our conditioned thought and emotion. As you deepen the ability to be fully present with what is, you access the ability to respond to life out of a state of presence, response, not out of conditioned mind or reactivity. So how do you develop the skill to be present? Mindful awareness practices, meditations, and self-exploration. Mindfulness is a hot button word, right? You hear it all the time. You can't throw a rock in the corporate world without hearing somebody talking about mindfulness. So mindfulness is the non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. Very simple. But you can't just flip a switch and be mindful. Mindful awareness is a challenging skill that needs to be cultivated, like cooking or learning a language, rollerblading, any other skill. Mindful awareness is cultivated through a disciplined and regular practice. There is time every day to practice, whether you think so or not. If you can't find 10 or 20 minutes a day, then email me, reach out, and we'll do a time audit, and I bet I can find that time with you. When we're present and mindful, we can set intention, and we can see choice points. We can then engage the situation and interact with the world around us as it is, and bring an emotional intelligence to it. Cultivating the ability to be present, mindful, and intentional helps us in every situation of our life. How do I treat my colleague in any given interaction? Should I eat ice cream for dinner every night? How should I speak to my children about inequality and racism? So it's from the very heavy and deeply rooted to the more lighthearted ways we interact with the world. Being present, mindful, and intentional can impact every single thing we do, every minute of every day. And I know that all of this sounds perhaps a bit ethereal, and it is at this point. These ideas are only of any value in action. And in order to put them into action, they must be studied, practiced, internalized, and lived. We are living systems in a living system where everything is changing around us all the time, and that presents challenges to us. However, if we set a framework that embraces the change, we can bring ourselves to the present moment and we can interact with the world from there. Frameworks provide a structure that help me manage all the different dimensions and complexities of whatever is going on. Instead of losing myself in the details, I'm able to hold a dynamic image in my mind of the relationships among different and sometimes competing ideas. This allows me to work with the details without ever losing my place in the big picture. There's a Tibetan Buddhist concept that I learned that talks about precious human life. I mentioned it a minute ago that Buddhism includes teachings about the inconceivability of the present moment. We can't begin to comprehend the causes and conditions that have given rise to this present moment. And when we recognize that incredible inconceivability and incredibleness of this present moment, it becomes apparent to us that we can't possibly waste this present moment. Not 1 second of our lives can be wasted. So Indian religions also teach the concept of samsara, a Sanskrit word that means cyclical. So most often it's associated with the cycle of life and death, but at its core, it's really about any cycle. So particular to this talk would be the habits through which we often unmindfully bring to all areas of our life. We get stuck in habitual cycles. We respond to situations and people in habitual ways. We bring preconception and judgment to circumstances, both positive and negative. Our habits can be destructive and limiting. Habits can keep us out of the present moment and limit our curiosity, excitement, innovation, creativity, and free expression. So if we're to live regenerative lives, if we are to break old unconscious patterns of belief and come to things in new, more conscious ways, then we must allow regenerative ideas and ways of applying them to enter and change us. In a slightly different way, we need to avoid approaching the material presented here, for instance, as knowledge, as some approved mental model. Instead, we need to approach what I'm talking about as a grand question, a provocation, or a challenge. Regenerative principles only become helpful when it has been tested by our own lived experience. Like I said, a disciplined practice, a meditation or contemplative practice, even a few minutes a day, is shown to have neuropsychologic impact. Excuse me. And so what if the most powerful change processes depend on qualitative rather than quantitative shifts? What if who we are becoming has more influence on how much stuff than how much stuff we are doing. The non-heroic path seeks to create profound and enduring change, not through large-scale movements or fighting the good fight, but by enabling people to transform themselves. When people learn how to evolve their own thinking, their beliefs, perspectives, aspirations, thought patterns, they become change catalysts in all parts of their lives and with everyone they touch. Social movements are built on the power of certain compelling ideas, of course, but regenerative change is built on the power of taking conscious charge of our thinking process and helping others do the same. We have to keep our vision from collapsing. When we collapse our vision, we lose our ability to see the full range of possibilities that lie hidden in plain view. To assess these possibilities, we need only recover our ability to explore multiple points of view from a level of perspective that sees their potential relatedness, to celebrate the interconnection that is to cultivate relational intelligence. And we need to recognize and experience new paradigms. So there are levels of paradigms. And again, a paradigm provides context for our lives and our work. They determine our perspectives and shape our choices that we make and the actions that we take. They're often unconscious, which means that it rarely occurs to us to examine them. It's even more rare to recognize that our paradigms operate at different levels and that these levels are very different implications for the terms, in terms of the quality and effects of the flow. And I'm going to skip over some of this stuff and talk directly about what is called the regenerative paradigm. In this framework, it's the highest level paradigm. And it focuses on how to build the capacity in people and other living systems to be self-determining in the world. At this level, we make a profound shift in perspective. We commit to seeking what's essential in each person and every sort of thing that is the subject of our work. We become radically particular. We are no longer willing to pigeonhole people or places or groups or materials because we see each as unique. When we make this shift, we're able to enter a deeply respectful relationship where the full expression of the unique potential of others is our primary objective. As the highest level of this paradigm in our framework, regenerative life incorporates and transforms how we work on how we work on all other frameworks, other paradigms. We're still willing to do good, but not in a generic or abstract way. The good we seek from an essence that wants to be expressed. We may still wish to reduce waste and dysfunction by arresting disorder in a system, but we never allow this to distract us from the overall creative purpose that we're pursuing. And there's a value return, which is another paradigm of our efforts that allow for us or encourage us to be able to continue those. But value return includes the fulfillment that arises from realizing the potential of someone or something other than ourselves and is not driven by ego or greed or narrow-minded focus. So if our attention, we have to put these paradigms into action. If our intention is to live a regenerative life, then we need to learn to recognize which paradigm we're currently working from and which paradigms are driving the decisions and actions of the people around us. This ability enables us to become conscious of our thinking and behavioral patterns, setting the stage for our own development while growing the capacity for others to help in that development. The goal for work at the regenerative life paradigm level is to enable living system actualization. Too often, people conceive of systems as aggregations of parts, but that really misses the point. We actually experience an entity as a living system within living systems. I said that earlier. I know that's kind of abstract. I'm a philosophy teacher after all. But let's think of it like a child, right? So we have individual children or something more than the sum of various parts. It is possible to think of children as bags of bones and guts and brains. but doing so clearly violates our sense of the essential meanings of their human lives. There's a poet from the Beat Generation called Robert Creeley, who wrote a poem and referred to children as hairy bags of water, which I have loved. But it turns out that when you say that to a new mother, like my sister-in-law, it's not nearly as funny. Anyway, once we recognize that there's essential meanings in this human life, when we have this perception, we're able to engage with a system as a coherent whole, with its tendency towards aliveness, with its own need to secure a place in the world by making beneficial contributions. So to enable living systems actualization means to perceive phenomena in terms of their wholeness and dynamic aliveness, rather than their thingness, and to take action and make choices in support of full expression of aliveness. At the regenerative life level, our focus is on what makes things alive. Life is happening in the present moment. This requires anchoring our work in the first principles of living systems, which becomes the ground for which it becomes possible to understand them. When we have a clear sense of these principles, we're quickly able to assess whether or not the work we're doing is regenerative. The overall direction of the work is, and regenerative work is, to grow capacity for vitality, viability, and evolution. This implies that regenerative work respects the autonomy and self-determination of living systems, and is committed to helping them become increasingly good at accomplishing their own actualization. If this is not our direction, we may imagine an heroic role for ourselves, in which we tell other living beings who they are and what they should become and how they should behave. But this robs those people of their agency, their potential for development, and their ability to make their own unique contributions to the world based on their creative and unique genius. So the key to rising to this level is the development of consciousness, or conscious mind. So by consciousness, I mean the ability to call upon your observing self that can watch the mind's activities and help it make choices about the quality of mental processes it engages in. This is easier said than done, because humans have a strong tendency to lose ourselves in our endless chatter of our mental activity. Conscious awareness, in other words, is a disciplined practice that must be built through time by reminding ourselves over and over and over and over to observe and guide our own minds. Without this discipline, neither evolution nor self-determination is possible. We are overcome by the power of habitual thinking, and it's a power that derives in part from the conservation of energy that habits enable. There's a philosopher, a quantum physicist called David Bohm, who makes a distinction, and there's a Zen philosopher called Dogen from the 1200s who made the same distinction between thoughting and thinking. So for him, thoughting is a process of recycling thoughts that we've had before. Pre-existing beliefs, assumptions, opinions, conventional wisdom, truisms. Thinking, by contrast, is a relatively rare activity wherein we generate new thoughts. Without the exercise of conscious awareness and choice, we are condemned to endlessly cycling through old, predetermined patterns, making it nearly impossible to transform ourselves in the world. We need to maintain our ability to close the gap between how we think the world should be and how the world really is. In this gap, we experience a great deal of anxiety and suffering and disconnection because the world is invariably different in the present moment than it was when we tried to latch on to something. And so we learn to recognize those patterns, those thought processes in meditation. I will never open a book. If I can, I'll use Dakota. She'll never open a book that says, Dakota, here's the answer to all the questions that you've ever had, and here's how your mind works. Only the person can go into their own mind and to look at the habits and processes and the way that your mind works. And when you do, you can recognize the choice point and intercept habitual pattern, intercept preconception, intercept judgment, and experience things and make decisions in the present moment. And when you do, you can do important things. My grandfather used to say to me all the time, whenever we talked, he would say, let's do something important today. So I say to you, let's do something important today. And my grandfather would close and remind me that it's today, every day. And so we can, through mindfulness and practice and discipline, embrace our uniqueness and celebrate our vitality and capacity and resilience to effect positive change in the world. So that's all I have to say. So if there are questions, I think Dakota's going to pop back in and ask some questions.
Well, I don't see any that have come in yet, but I do want to give everyone a moment to gather their thoughts. Send in questions if you have them. We'd love to have Mac answer them for you while we have him here. But while we're waiting, in case anyone is typing something up, I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your wonderful content with us, Mac. We really appreciate it. Looks like no questions are coming in quite yet. I do want to give everyone just a quick moment. Bring them on while we have them here. We have some time to spare. I guess I don't know if this is really a question, but you mentioned the endless chatter that we all have. That is like one of the biggest challenges in my life. And I know that's the same for a lot of people, especially in just the world that we live in today with the social media and just, it makes it so challenging. I don't know if you have any like special thoughts or tools or advice for people who really struggle with that. I think that's so prevalent today. I would love if you have anything that you can dive in deeper to, that would be amazing.
Okay, thanks, Dakota. It's a question that comes up all the time. And a lot of people will mistake the process of meditation or mindful awareness with getting rid of those thoughts. You'll never be able to do it, right? So if we were, I might ask you to close your eyes and stop thinking, and you can't do that, right? So the process of meditation is to learn to understand what the chatter is, learn to understand how that chatter is emerging and why it's emerging. So when you start to pay attention to and label the thoughts as they're running through your mind, you can learn the patterns and you can learn what they are, and you can learn, what is triggering those thoughts or what experiences have led to those thoughts. And you can learn to assess whether or not you're really in the present moment, or are you listening to yourself, and there's a concept that I teach when I teach meditation. So meditation is about paying attention. Okay, so we all, to a certain extent, can pay attention, but oftentimes our mind just kind of drifts away, right? So maybe you're reading a book, and you're reading a couple pages, and you think, "Wait, what's going on? How did I get here?" And it turns out you kind of like weren't paying attention. You weren't really paying attention. So what meditation and mindfulness practices allow you to do is have what's called meta attention. Okay, so it's paying attention to paying attention. So when you're doing something and your mind starts to drift, you can kind of catch it and bring it back. Okay, and you can see that when you do that, you don't have to chase your thoughts all the way through. Okay, so maybe it's lunchtime in Fort Collins. So, I might be listening to a talk, a weird talk about regenerative principles, right? And I think, boy, I'm really hungry. I can say, I get that, I'm really hungry. And then go back to the talk or go back to whatever I was doing. Or I could say, I am really hungry. Boy, I shouldn't have skipped breakfast. Or maybe I should have had a different breakfast. Or what should I get for lunch? Should I have a ham sandwich? I had a ham sandwich yesterday, right? I mean, you can kind of like, you go all the way downstream, and by the time you realize that you're 5 minutes out of the present moment. And that chatter has kind of taken you out of what you're doing right now. And so learn to pay attention to the chatter. It's your friend. It's not something you can ever quiet down, but it is something that you can learn to understand.
That's so good. Thank you. We do have a couple of more questions, so that's exciting.
Okay.
First one being, how do you think that well-being has changed for people during the pandemic? Which is a loaded question, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah. What pandemic? So yeah, I mean, obviously, we have over the course of the last 16 months or so been asked to radically change the way we approach the world, and radically change rather the way that we think about health. Okay, so obviously the pandemic is to do with health. As a virus causing people to lose their health and lose their lives. So there's that element of health. But I think the pandemic has forced people into a circumstance where they are starting to ask the questions about their self-care and about their relationships with their family that they're stuck in the house with, and their relationship to their children, their children's relationship to education and learning, or even college students and their relationship to learning and education. And so, I really think that the pandemic has given us an opportunity to better understand the circumstances for well-being. It has forced us to kind of recognize where we may not be living a life that is creating capacity and resilience, and instead figure out how to introduce those things into our lives. So I really hope that it has been, the positive. A positive might be that it has kind of introduced people to things that they may never have thought about because they're swept up in the normal things of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, I love this question. Any book or podcast recommendations?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on, I guess, what your interests are. So I really like the Rich Roll podcast. He's an ultra endurance athlete who kind of brings physical and health well-being into kind of a sense of spiritual and spiritual well-being. If you're interested in like Hinduism, there's a podcast every day at 3 a.m. called Wisdom of the Sages that you can subscribe to and not have to wake up at 3 a.m. And for books, if I have a book list that has about 400 books on it. So if you are interested in that, put your email in the chat and Dakota can send it to me and I'll forward it to you.
But that is amazing. We could go ahead and just toss that in the post of an email if you want and send it out to everyone.
Excellent.
Let's do it.
Yes,
okay, we'll send that out. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, one more. We have a question. We might have to interpret this one.
Okay.
How to view the seemingly increasing complexities of today's world versus the slow-paced or simple good old days might have seemed?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So, and I hear it a lot, but I will tell you that, professionally, I do things like translate ancient Sanskrit texts, okay, or ancient Japanese texts, or dive into ancient Chinese texts. And what I find is that in 1400 BCE, there's talk of our lives are being overrun with complexity, and our societies are becoming so challenging, and these decisions are causing so much anxiety. And so I have a tendency to resist the urge to say kind of like the good old days. I know what you mean. And I think understanding the role of the interconnected nature of all things allows for us to recognize that what we think is maybe chaos is really a part of a system that works. And so, again, we can pay attention to that complexity and use it and embrace it as opportunities to, as an opportunity to, help one to think more clearly or to embrace a broader perspective. And so the complexity is never going away. Okay, it's only getting more and more, right? We have, Dakota mentioned a minute ago, the social media and the endless chatter and the, endless resources and the internet. And, we need to be able to filter some of that. There's a teacher that I know in California called Vaisheshika Prabhu, and he often talks about when you're walking, and they have these other places, but when you're walking down the streets in San Francisco, you see a metal plate above like a sewer, and the metal plate says something like, whatever you put in goes directly to the sea. Okay, right? And so he has this idea that whatever you put in kind of goes to the core, and so you really want to understand what you're putting in. Visual content, any learning you do through books or podcasts or alumni talks or whatever the case may be, you want to pay attention to what you're putting in.
That's really good. I love it. Okay, well, I think we're closing out the questions. I haven't seen any more come in, but thank you all for throwing those our way.
Did anyone put that they took my class?
You know what? I don't know. I have someone else monitoring the comments, so let me know if anyone came through. We also can view those, and I can send you a list of anyone who's viewing that took your class. We'd definitely love to share that with you.
Cool.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, just another round of thank yous, both for Mac, for all of your wonderful presenting today, all your work on this, and to everyone who is viewing, who sent in questions. We appreciate you all so much. There is a survey linked in the comments if you have 2 minutes to fill that out. It's super short. We'd really love your feedback. And we hope to see you virtually or maybe in person. We'll see very, very soon. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.